Hey everybody, welcome to what I'm calling Historians of the Movie's First Read. This is the first time we're going to do something like this. I just got back from seeing John Wick 4 at the movie theater about an hour ago, or at least the films ended about an hour ago, and it took me about an hour to get back home, get into the house, restart the computer, all these kind of things. I was in such a hurry. I wanted to get in and get going, and then naturally nothing got done quickly. So I thought it might be kind of cool to sit back and do a quick first take, if you will, on this movie. And let me just go ahead and say now, spoilers everywhere. I'm not going to hold back on this. So if you want to watch the movie and then come back and listen to this or whatever, but if you don't want to have the movie spoiled for you, stop now, go do something better with your time, do something else. Because I'm just going to jump into it. And, I want to get back in this idea of where we left off with John Wick 3 Parabellum. If you recall at the very end of the film, John Wick is at war with the world, right? He is being pursued by every single person in the world. He's gotten himself into a serious bind. And this movie takes right back off. I mean, how do you take John Wick and keep this fight going? He's gotten himself progressively deeper into this world, and now he's got to figure a way to get out. And ultimately, that's what this film is about, is ultimately getting out of this world where he starts off actually at the very beginning of, say, John Wick, where he was out of the world and he gets, of course, pulled back in, a la Michael Corleone in Godfather 3. Once I thought I was out, and I get pulled right back in. And I think that there's a lot here to like, especially if you're a historian. And I was arguing with maybe where do we start and how do we think about this? And I think one of the things that I've always been drawn to when it comes to John Wick is this world building that they are continually building upon in these films. I thought the first one was really great. This idea of John Wick as the Baba Yaga, this boogeyman, or this man you send to kill the boogeyman. This idea that there was this story beyond the story that we saw. And I think in a lot of ways, that's the reason why Star Wars, the original Star Wars in 1977 worked so well. It's because there were always these allusions to this world we don't actually get to see. We get to see the remnants of it. We get to pick up afterwards, and we hear about the Clone Wars, or we hear about Luke's father, or we hear about who Darth Vader was, or Obi-Wan being this general and so forth. And that's a lot like what we do in the original first John Wick. We get introduced to this world. We understand that there are some rules to living in this world. And I think it's really successful, right? There are other films that do this really, really well. We see a lot of this in vampire movies. The Underworld films actually do this really, really well. I'm not a big fan of those movies, but they do a really good idea of building this idea of there's this world you don't know about that's been here all along. The Da Vinci Code does this really well. There's this hierarchy. Movies even The Skulls, right? The Paul Walker and Joshua Jackson movie from I think the 1990s, where there's this underworld of hierarchy of college undergraduates. And there are all of these allusions to a foundation, a structure, which I think most of us are at least somewhat familiar with, which is the Roman Catholic Church, right? Words like excommunicated, they kind of point linguistically at this world and this culture that has existed far longer than maybe the world and culture in which we currently live in, and really kind of point to this idea that this world of John Wick, of the Continental Hotels, of the council, of the high table, will exist long after we are gone. And what we're seeing are just moments in time is part of this. And I've always kind of dug into that. I think they do a really good job continuing to build onto this. But, ultimately, I kind of wonder how much more you can do. I know there's the idea of The Ballerina, which is a spin-off of these films coming with Ana de Armas. And I know that there was a series that was planned about the Continental Hotel. And I kind of wonder, okay, are we going to dilute this too much? Star Wars did this, where you started to get too much of the films and too much of the history. And I think it starts to take away from some of that. So we'll have to see in the coming years what happens with the John Wick world as they continue to build along it. Other thoughts. Why does John Wick appeal to us so much as a hero? if you have listened to Historians of the Movies podcast before, or listened to me kind of rant on the Sunday night things that we've done for the last several years, you're probably familiar with my theory of, say, in the 1980s about Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone being these kinds of Achilles superheroes, these unstoppable killing machines that are very macho, very muscular, and so you saw Arnold, you saw Sylvester, you saw to a lesser degree maybe Jean-Claude Van Damme or Dolph Lundgren, and even Chuck Norris, right, as these brawny, beefy men who could overpower the bad guys and ultimately get away. And you started to see a change in that, say in the late 1980s. I've often thought of Bruce Willis in Die Hard as the Odysseus response to the Achilles of Arnold and Stallone, and afterwards, even including guys like Keanu Reeves, say in movies like Speed and all these films that were essentially like Die Hard on a blank. Those were all essentially Odysseus doing whatever. And I've been trying to think about this in terms of like John Wick and like who he is and what does he do. And ultimately, as I was driving home, I started to think about John Wick maybe as Ares, as the god of war himself. This man this Greek figure who really can't escape the idea of the central identity of who he is. He is a killing machine. And the central turmoil, the central crux of all these films is actually, can we escape who we are? It's a very traditional philosophical question. Who are we as a people? Can we be something that we are not? Are we born? Are we called to do a thing? And I think one of the things that these 4 films that we've now seen is saying decisively, yes, John Wick is this killing machine. This is who he is. And no, there's really no way out aside from his own death. He tried to get out, and that getting out was only eventually met with, with tragedy, with the death of his wife Helen, right? And through none of his own being, but it seemed like he's kind of damned to be into this role. And I think maybe sometimes it's a very human trait. We all kind of feel like maybe we're locked into a certain way, and as much as we might want to escape it, we just can't seem to. And I think it's one of the things that the John Wick series really plays with really, really well. So if I'm playing around this idea about Greek heroes and who they are, for now I'm kind of thinking about John Wick as Ares, perhaps. Although I would absolutely love to hear maybe your own thoughts. Those of you far more familiar with Greek mythology than I am, I would love to hear your thoughts on like maybe who he might slide in to be a better candidate. And I thought about the very few that I understood, but I think Ares might be the best person that I can think about. Overall, really, really liked the film. And the one big criticism we've seen of the film is that it is really long. And that's absolutely true. I think the film clocks in at like 2 hours and 38 minutes. That's a real long time to see it in a theater. And I'm so glad to be able to go back to a theater. I actually enjoy paying for overpriced popcorn and soda. I really believe in the pageantry of going to the theater, of the experience of going to the theater. But I also had 25 minutes of movie trailers beforehand. Add in 2 hours and 38 minutes of film. And then, of course, you've got the time to commute to and from the movie to theater. It took me about half an hour to get back and forth to the place I went. So realistically, I'm 4 hours committed to going to see this film. That's a half day. That is a half day of John Wick. You are a half day adventure to go see this movie. And I know the director, Chad Stahelski, had said, hey, look, people complaining about the runtime are the same people who will binge watch TV and things like that. And I totally get the argument, but they're able to do that from their home couches. And they're not having to fight traffic. They're not having to go back and forth. They're not having to walk in, walk out, deal with other people and so forth. So, there's a legitimate concern about the length of the thing. However, in watching the film, I don't know very much where you could have cut out for the story that they're trying to tell. Of course, there's a ton of gunplay and a ton of really creative fight sequences that I'll get into in just a moment that I really enjoyed. Towards the end of the film, it did feel like maybe they could have cut out some of the fighting to get to, say, that final duel. But you really did kind of need to assemble the three good guys of this film. And of course, I'm talking about not only, say, John Wick, Keanu Reeves as John Wick, but also Donnie Yen as Kane. And then Shamir Anderson, who is the tracker, and all three of those guys have a very important role. They are at times adversaries, and of course, towards the end, if you've seen the film, and again, this is a spoiler, so stop. If you've seen the film, you know that ultimately they are all aligned, and you kind of had to get them all contesting one another to show how they were evenly matched against one another, but also how they would be able to help each other towards the end. And of course, you've got other folks that are in the film, and I'm looking here right now. I've just kind of got my list here in front of me. I've got, obviously Lawrence Fishburne as the Bowery King. And then, of course, you had Ian McShane as Winston Scott, right? Who is, just chews up every single scene that he's in. So, you've got all of these different people. The fight scenes are outstanding. One in particular I thought that was amazing, and I didn't really even notice, and this is the thing that these kind of shots tend to do. There is an overhead tracking shot towards the end of the film once that John Wick gets a hold of the shotgun with the dragon's breath shotgun shells, and the camera switches to that traditional, very close up front style. Chad Stahelski, when he directs these fight scenes, it's a very, very visceral, up close kind of thing, and then the camera kind of pivots up, and you're kind of watching it almost like an old school video game or something like that. You're watching the fight from the ceiling, and it's tracking around. And I thought it was, I didn't recognize it at first. It took me a second to get it, that's what the film was doing. And then it's just pure joy to be able to watch. I thought it was an incredible fighting scene towards the end. Once you're watching that, I'm looking forward to seeing that again, maybe from my couch this time so I don't have to deal with the traffic. But, I really, really loved watching that tracking shot to see where the film goes. There's a lot that's been said about the geographic nature of the film, and I really felt like, that makes a lot of sense. These films are positioning themselves to audiences well beyond the United States. So you're obviously going to want to get films shot in Japan, shot in France, shot in, say, China, which this film did not go to, but, because people who are in those countries are going to have a vested interest in seeing their countries on screen. They're going to see, they're going to enjoy seeing Paris, or going to enjoy seeing Tokyo. And I thought Tokyo was actually a really delightful setting in this particular film. For a while, I kept thinking about the late 80s film with Michael Douglas and Andy Garcia, Black Rain, if you've seen that. That definitely came to mind. And of course, I'm such a huge Hiroyuki Sanada fan. So seeing him on screen, seeing him opposite Donnie Yen was amazing. And I really enjoyed that. Let's talk about Donnie Yen. I was a little concerned coming in. And I've liked Donnie Yen and everything I've seen him in. I haven't seen him in a whole lot of stuff, but obviously I've seen him in Rogue One. I've seen Rogue One more times than I can count. I've seen him in Ip Man, a couple of the Ip Man films, and generally like Donnie Yen, the stuff that I've seen from him. He seems like just good people. But I was a little concerned when I saw, oh boy, we're going to have Donnie Yen once again as the blind Ronin, and all these guys seem to be Ronins at some point in their lives. Once again, just like in Rogue One, it's going to be a blind Ronin who's got to do all these different things. I was like, man, is this guy going to get typecast? Is it typecast as a blind guy who has mysterious powers? But he was terrific, man. He was really, really great. I've always loved him. And of course, Lance Reddick. I've loved Lance Reddick since forever. I came to Lance Reddick really through The Wire. He's one of my favorite characters in The Wire. And, of course, he just passed the other day, and it was a super surprise that he passed. This young guy, 60 years old, really in shape kind of guy. Apparently just I haven't seen what happened with him, but tragic because I really liked him. And of course he passes very early in this film, and his death is definitely kind of hangs over this film for more than one reason now. I wish we had more Lance Reddick, but I wish realistically we've got that he was still here with us now. There's one other guy that we should probably talk about that I love. Two other guys, right? Bill Skarsgård was great as the Marquis Vincent de Clermont, right? That's as close to French as I'm going to get. I thought he was actually really terrific. Those of you who know him from Pennywise. I'm continuing to be impressed by the man's range. Scott Adkins, I thought was really terrific. I want to get to him in a moment. But I also I also want to come back and talk just a little bit about Clancy Brown, because he plays the Harbinger. He's this guy who comes around, and again, he's a guy with the mysterious past. He's missing a part of his ring finger. And how much fun was it to see Clancy Brown, the Kurgan from the Highlander first film, to be situated in a movie with swords, European or global locations, this underworld, not much like the Highlander series, and of course there was also ultimately fighting on sacred ground, the church. So I really enjoyed seeing Clancy Brown. Every time I see Clancy Brown, he's got that amazing gravelly voice that I love, right? So I could listen to Clancy Brown read a phone book. I want to talk to you about the best fight. End of story. I actually thought it was with Scott Adkins. Those of you who know Scott Adkins' work. And I haven't seen him in a whole bunch of stuff. He did some of those Universal Soldier films, kind of the sequels to the sequels. And he plays this really kind of a big guy in this big kind of a fat suit, Killa, in Berlin. And that whole scene is delightful. The card scene is awesome. And one of the things I kept coming back to is a movie that is so much set on gunplay and violence. And this movie is loud in a lot of spots, with all the explosions and music and backgrounds and everything like that. The best scenes in the film were actually the very quiet scenes. And my favorite scene was actually with the three characters sitting across Killa in Berlin, this ramp up to a fight scene that you know is coming. And I thought Atkins was awesome. The fight between him and Wick was terrific. And I really just enjoyed, all of that. So I thought that was really, really cool to see. Thoughts on this movie going forward? And the end was payoff. I don't think there was any surprise that Wick survives. It's the least convincing death on screen I've ever seen. There's one part that I'm starting to miss, though. Is like I want to see maybe some of these other characters. I was really hoping we might see Halle Berry at some point in time, or see Common, who I think is actually the best antagonist to John Wick. At some point in time, Common, I think, was amazing in John Wick 2. I hope to see him back at some point in time. I don't know where you go with these movies. And, of course, they're going to, I'm sure, figure that part out, because there is a stinger. There is an end credits scene. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch that. I don't want to spoil that part for you as well. But clearly there's going to be a thing. And I don't quite know where you go with this. Chance Stahelski, the director of the film, had said something to the effect of like, look, this is not a happy movie franchise. The movie started with his happiness ending, right? With his marriage to Helen, then his brief hope with the Beagle. And it's not like John Wick can end up with the girl, right? It's not like he can fall in love over the course of these films, where you traditionally have these redemptions via a romantic opposite, whether it's a actor, actress, whomever in these films. So I don't know where they're going to go with this movie. Clearly, we're going to have another John Wick 5, another John Wick. They're going to make way too many of these movies at some point in time, because they're making too much money. And they are a lot of fun to see. And I enjoyed it. I think that this is probably my second favorite of the series, maybe third. I still feel like the original John Wick it's so tight, so compact. It does an amazing job of introducing you to this world. It's delightful to hear these backstories. The gun katas, if you will, were so different when we first saw them come out. Really liked how John Wick 2 kind of upped the ante into that. I wasn't as big of a fan of John Wick 3, of Parabellum. I felt like, as much as I like Mark Dacascos, I felt like his character was just too hammy, too over the top, that fanboyish guy who's trying to kill Wick. I didn't have a buy-in on that. It kind of took away from the film. So I kind of felt like in a lot of ways, maybe this film was a return to form for the series. It definitely took things up a notch. Again, the fight scenes are even more over the top. I'm glad to see Ian McShane back. I'm glad to see the Continental's going to be bigger and better. And I guess maybe that's kind of where they're setting the stage for these future films, these series, Continental, to come out. And I'm glad that we could see other Continentals out in Japan. We could see Paris. And I want to see where this movie franchise goes from here on out. So I'm a huge fan of Keanu Reeves as a person. I think it's what he's been able to do with his career, being able to successfully create these marquee characters, whether it's from Bill and Ted, even though it was Speed, even though it was only a single film. Obviously, The Matrix, and now John Wick, who I think most of us will probably associate him with the most going forward. So, hope you guys dig the film. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what you think. And hope you liked the episode. So, go see it. Check it out. Talk to you later.